Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review for Iron Man issue 22. And we are getting closer to milestone issue 650, so that's going to be pretty good. But I actually enjoyed this one. It set us up more on Tony and Rhodey pretty much looking into Vic, giving us a little bit more background on Vic, which I found very helpful because I was not very familiar with the character, and they did a good job of essentially doing an info dump without having it be really obvious and really kind of poorly executed. It was executed very well in this issue while getting us set up for how they're going to be dealing with this shadowy black market of tech going forward. So we see them pretty much giving us a lowdown on Vic, how they used to be like an inner circle back in the day, but the thing is, he stayed on during Obadiah Stane's takeover of Tony's company, and then there was like he lost a Model 1 armor suit in Mexico. Vic destroyed it with Frank Castle, and we see that like Vic is pretty much was like beat to death. We see a little bit of the aftermath, but not a whole lot of it. And then we see that like Rhodey is pretty much talking throughout this issue and providing most of the context and saying that like Tony does know how to hold a grudge, like contrary to what he says, he knows how to hold a grudge and kind of held it on Vic. And then since Vic was out there, he decided to be like a special kind of courier that started getting in with kind of like worse and worse kind of people, like tyrannical governments, even with Hydra. But then of course he gets in and gets the whole thing with the Mandarin's rings and is trying to get in contact with them, and that's kind of how Vic met his end. And I do like how it's like we didn't get to him in time, that's on us, and how they don't really forgive themselves for not picking up the phone and trying to get to him sooner. So they pretty much sweep, get scans of everything. Boss is pretty much giving them lowdown and info on what's going on as we start getting more information on their plan, that there's going to require Stark level money to buy it all. And we learn that they don't want to go in suits blazing because they don't know what tech will be unleashed and utilized, and it could create an even kind of worse scenario. So it's better to go in, buy it all, and then dismantle it with as least amount of force going on as possible. So of course they need they need a front man for it. And that's where we're introduced to Clay Wilson, aka Carl Walker, aka Force, when he's wearing his armor, and that he's going to be their frontman buyer. And he, of course, is asking like how bad it was, and he's like he was beat to death and everything. And we start seeing like all the different kind of things that are at source control, and just seeing all the different kind of like crazy tech and shit that could be like used to like destroy things. Nuclear plug-and-play, chemical doomsdays, biologically engineered nightmares, cybernetic and computerized nastiness, weather weapons, things that fuck with time itself, quantum level reorganization and annihilation, star system killers. So it's a lot of stuff that you kind of don't want in the wrong hands. And then this is where they're talking about like the moral compass and how, of course, Stark was built on manufactured weapons, didn't really have a moral compass, and that their armors are pretty much utilized to correct that. Carl's like, but yeah, Rhodey's called War Machine, and it's like irony and stuff. And the thing is, if they go and blast away, wrong fuse, boom. And it's probably going to take most of the Stark fortune, every penny. And he's like, it's fine, it felt like blood money anyway. And that's kind of cool. And the thing is, Tony is always into kind of reinventing himself. He pretty much, this is just a, granted, things like this have pretty much happened where he's pretty much trying to rebuild himself and everything and rebuild his fortune. So it's possible, but I like that he's trying to deal with the legacy of Stark. Even though it's kind of been a story that's been done before, it's interesting to see it done like this. And they start going through, and we see a lot of titanium and everything. Carl's like, oh, it's probably Titanium Man. And they're like, yes, of course it's Titanium Man. Well, fuck me, I guess. But then they start seeing extraterrestrial metals involved. They start putting it together that like the Mandarin rings are out there. It's like, ah, shit. So that's probably why they got to him. And then they hear that an assailant's inbound. And it's like, all right, Boris is early. and they knew he was kind of coming. And he's like, well, my armor's upstairs, but they don't want him to have heroic footage. Just like, hey, step this out. We're going to do this. We'll meet you in Macau. He's like, all right, cool. So they pretty much go outside to kind of get ready. And then we get a really kick-ass introduction of Titanium Man. It's like, God damn, he's coming down. They were trying to make sure that, like, they did least amount of damage as possible, and Titanium Man doesn't give a fucking shit. And I really like the art style in regards to the armors in this. I mean, that's a really nice page, and we do see a lot of kind of cool stuff going on with the armors as this fight is ensuing. Again, when you're doing an Iron Man comic, you always want the armors to have the best kind of importance going forward and going through, because that's a pretty big selling point. And this one does it very well. And granted, they also don't skimp on faces and everything, because as you see, you can actually tell who the people are. And that sometimes happens where they don't put as much effort or whatnot into faces. Now granted, that could also be time constraints, so you never know. I always give benefit of the doubt depending upon what kind of going on with certain kind of art styles. So we see the Titanium Man is kind of like mucking around, and they're of course wondering how much Titanium Man's being paid. He's like, soon I'll be a Stark level oligarch. He's like, I'm offended. And then of course we see that he's got some upgrades. Tony's kind of blasting on him. He does a kind of laser blast onto Rhodey that kind of fucks him up. He's like, oh, I'm gonna kill another one of your friends, Stark. And it's like, oh yeah, you got all this kind of high top-notch weaponry, but you're still missing like the John Wayne Haymaker, the Steve Rogers Roundhouse. I really like that. And then one that Vic taught him. I'm like, that's a kind of cool little thing for Tony to showcase his actual kind of fighting prowess and styles that he's learned from people. And then of course he's like, yeah, going old schools. And while we're going on old school, bullets still work pretty well as he just starts blasting him with the Gatling gun. And Tony's just like, alright, where's the rings? But then, of course, there's unknown variables, and he gets blasted with, let's see, Compound 13, the most lethal nerve gas ever, as Titanium Man goes, and then we start getting a little information that Compound killed Captain Marvel, let's see, and that it takes a lot to make sure that you survive this thing. Like, it paralyzes your entire respiratory system almost immediately. That's just before the bleeding, and like you have to have the toxicity settings on right. We see Tony is kind of fucked up on this. It's like, yeah, that's a harder thing to kind of deal with. And of course we see people understanding that Tony got hit with the toxin. Patsy comes in to kind of see what's going on with him. And even Steve. We see that Patsy's pretty much like talking about baseball and all that nobody else is in on this. Not Patsy and not you, and we see that Rhodey's pretty much been like talking about their whole kind of plan as a failsafe for Steve in case it goes wrong. And of course, I do like Steve in this. It's a nice kind of cameo, and the writing works pretty well. Just being like, hey, there's a hole in the Avengers. We'd always be happy to have you on the team, and he needs to take some time to clear his head. He's like, I understand. You look like you could use some rest, and then we'll be here when you get back. But anything else you want to tell me? As Rhodey sticks with the plan and is pretty much just in case things go south. He's recording all this for Cap because of the variables. Anything can go sideways. And of course, we see somebody talking to him, being like, they'll be mad when they find out. Of course they will. How are you feeling? And he's like, score one for the filtration system. I'm sorry again, you had to watch me almost die. And of course, yes, he's ready to launch. As much as I ever am. That's what worries me. That's what always worries me about Tony Stark, as he's now in his stealth suit. And again, I really like the art style for this stealth suit. It'll be interesting to see how it kind of works, because it doesn't just look like... I mean, granted, it still follows the same kind of general outline as the suit that we've seen mostly in these, like this. However, it doesn't have a... it doesn't have the obvious arc reactor, but you can see the outline. It's really kind of cool. So we'll see how this kind of stealth suit works, what its fighting capabilities are, if it gets into a fight, or how it's able to get out of fights and everything. So that's kind of cool. We'll see how that kind of works. And this is a different kind of... I'm glad that they're putting some interesting kind of story restrictions that make sense. I mean, granted, you could be like the plot demands. It's like, oh, we're making it so that way Tony Stark has to figure out other ways to kind of get through this conflict. But it's an interesting kind of conflict for him to kind of go through, of not trying to punch his way out of something, but instead trying to keep that to a minimum and make sure that all these horrible, crazy devices can be stopped and disarmed so that way they don't do any other harm. Now, granted, we do know that this will probably go sideways. I mean, Titanium Man went sideways. Granted, I think it was always kind of part of the plan of having Tony Stark out of commission, so if they didn't have to, like, orchestrate it themselves, if this didn't happen, they'd probably have had to orchestrate it themselves to kind of have it to that kind of effect. But I do like that Rhodey's like, listen, I'm doing this, I'm making sure that we have a thing so that way Steve knows what's going on, so that way if this goes sideways and it goes completely and utterly nutty, it would probably be an Avengers level event that they would have to kind of deal with. That is a smart move to do. Tony sometimes gets up into his own head and his own ass and doesn't tell people what he's doing, and that leads to more and more problems. So we'll see how this kind of works out. And I'm like, all right, cool. I'm excited. Let's see this. So those are my opinions on the issue. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also, like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.